Starwalker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, a podcast all about tabletop role-playing games from the perspective of the captain's chair. We talk a lot about being a game master on this show, appropriately enough, but how can we be better players? Look on any online gaming community and you'll see that there are far more players looking for a GM than the other way around. How can you be the kind of player GMs want at their tables? Join me on the journey and I'll give you some tips. Together, we can become excellent players and find game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener, fellow gamer, GM, player, all of the above. Welcome to episode 42 of Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. I am very excited to be recording today. This is an auspicious day for me. This is the first time I've fired up the studio in my new home back in Seattle, Washington. So I am back in Seattle after my 15 months or so in Indiana, and it's really great to be back. I feel like I've awoken from a hibernation, or I don't know, I've been out on the outer rim and I finally came back to the core worlds. I don't know, I could come up with a million analogies, but it feels really great to be back in civilization, in the land of great beer, great food, great weather, great scenery, just great everything. But anyway, I am really glad to be back now. I've had episodes coming out that I pre-recorded and getting caught up, getting those out to you. But I'm really excited to be recording again and be back in the saddle. I have a lot of great interviews on deck that I'm going to be doing with quite a few really interesting people. Going to be talking about all kinds of stuff, all kinds of game mastering topics. But today, I'm going to switch to the other side of the table a little bit and talk about being a player. But first, a couple things I want to go over real quick here at the top of the show. First of all, I got some really great iTunes reviews. And so I want to thank those of you who've been leaving me reviews on iTunes. I really appreciate it. One thing I did on my 34-hour drive out here to Seattle is I got caught up on listening to a lot of podcasts. I haven't had a lot of time to listen to podcasts lately. I enjoyed listening to a lot of podcasts on the drive out there, and my wife Nikki was super awesome and patient and kind and sat there and listened to all these, especially RPG podcasts that she really could care less about. But she was a really good sport, and we have the supernatural rule in our car, which is driver picks the music and passenger shuts his cake hole. So my music happened to be podcasting for the most part, but I listen to a lot of great podcasts, and I listened to some podcasts about podcasting. And one little gem that I got on the trip out here is the importance of making this a two-way conversation. So it's not just me talking to you, but it's you talking back to me. And that's really one of the big things that makes podcasting awesome and makes this so very different than listening to a talk show on the radio or watching a talk show on TV. The level of interaction we can have is very different in a podcast. You can email me, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can tweet me on Twitter @Lex Starwalker. You can message me on Google+, Lex Starwalker. You can comment on my videos on YouTube. You can comment on my streams in Twitch. And so there are all these great ways that you can communicate to me, and you often do. A lot of you do. I get emails, I get messages, and I try to, where I've tried in the past, to bring things up that people talk to me about. But there are a lot of emails I get that I never get around to mentioning. A lot of tweets, messages I get that I never get around to mentioning. So something that I'm going to try to do in the future is I'm going to try to do better of taking note of all these communications I get from you during the week and bringing more of them into the conversation on the show. I try very hard to answer every email I get and every message I get, and I think I pretty much do. If I ever didn't answer something, well, I guess I wouldn't know, right? Because it was an oversight. But I try really hard to do that. But in addition to that, I should share the great ideas and opinions and insights that I get from you when you message me privately with the greater audience, right? So among these things that I feel like I should give more credit to is people that give me great iTunes reviews. So while I was on my move, I got quite a few iTunes reviews. I got a great one by Wow Cran. Thank you, Wow Cran, who says, I've been playing role-playing games for almost 30 years, and I learned something from every episode. I too have been playing for almost 30 years, and I too learned something from every episode. So that's awesome. If you are serious about being a game master for any game, I highly recommend listening to this podcast. Lex obviously cares about this hobby with a passion that is inspiring. This isn't just for game masters either, but players can learn from this podcast also, because it will help you understand what your GM should be doing and how you can help make that happen. So thank you, Wow Cran. That's a great review, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, it definitely helps as a player to kind of know what to look for in a GM. And maybe that could be a topic on an episode, is how to find a good GM as a player. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And this is a good time for this review because I am trying to make this episode especially very germane to players. So thank you for that review. I got another great one from Ganj the Unjust, who says, Lex provides fantastic information, insights, commentary, and interviews. A great resource for anyone interested in game mastering or playing tabletop RPGs. Very good production quality as well. Thank you. I try really hard. One of my favorite podcasts. Awesome. Thank you, Ganj the Unjust. I am flattered and honored to be one of your favorite podcasts. That's awesome. And I want to welcome any new listeners I've got. I just recently played an ad on Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff. So I saw quite a bump in my downloads since then. And so I think I've got some new listeners listening today. So welcome aboard. Welcome to the Obsidian Monolith. This is the ship of the imagination, if you will, that we cruise around and check out different role-playing games and universes in. Another great review by InfoWeasel, who says, I am writing my first homebrew campaign, and this podcast has given me a great set of tools to work with. Looking forward to running very soon. And that's awesome. Thank you, InfoWeasel. I'm so excited that you're running a campaign and that you're GMing and that you're doing your own thing. That is awesome. And we always need more GMs. So thank you very much for your review and your very nice comments. I really appreciate all those reviews. And so if you leave me a 5-star review on iTunes, I will at the very least thank you on the show, and I may even read your review. I don't know. I feel weird reading these reviews. I know a lot of podcasts do it. I feel like I'm tooting my own horn. It feels very narcissistic to me. But I thought I would do it until people beg me to stop or tell me I suck, because people say really cool things in the reviews, and it's really good for me to know like what's working for you in the show. For instance, InfoWeasel's comment about the world building, and he's talked a little bit with me on email too. That's really helpful because I've been very unsure about the world building episodes, how those would be received, whether they would really be useful or helpful to anyone, and whether they would annoy people who don't play D&D or don't even play fantasy RPGs, whether those kinds of people could find any relevance in it, because my example world is a D&D world. And so far, I've only gotten positive comments about it, and I've heard from people like InfoWeasel who find it really helpful, and that's awesome. And that makes me really happy because I put a lot of work into those, and I've just been very kind of unsure if they would be useful. So I'm glad that they are. And I am always open to feedback from you, whether it's something you like, something you don't like, something you want to hear, whatever, something you don't want to hear. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Also, I have a new patron. This also happened on my move. Maybe I should just shut down the studio and go on the road for a week or two more often, because I got all these reviews. I got a new patron. Was really awesome. I'm driving cross country, driving really long days, and to get these notifications on my phone of, I have a new patron was super cool. So a big thank you and shout out to Mr. Chris Navta. I almost fucked up the word Chris. That name I know, Navta. I hope I'm saying that right. But thank you, Chris, for becoming a patron. Really appreciate it. And you can find more about becoming a patron at patreon.com/GameMastersJourney. However, I will tell you, I am going to be revamping the Patreon. Right now, I have a GM Intrusions Patreon. I have a Game Masters Journey Patreon. I have a Star Citizens United Patreon. I'm starting a new podcast very soon called the Expanse Unofficial Podcast, and probably would have had a Patreon for that too. And it's just a lot to manage. Each of those have separate logins, separate email addresses, just the way Patreon's set up. You have to do it that way. And I feel like I'm spread too thin, and I haven't been doing as good a job as I would like at getting bonus content out to the patrons and stuff like that. So over this bit of a break I've had during the move, I talked with my wife Nikki about it, and we kind of threw some ideas back and forth. And we've decided that the smarter way to do this going forward is to just have one Patreon to rule them all. I'm going to set up a Starwalker Studios Patreon page, and that will be for all the shows. So from now on, once I get that set up, if you want to become a patron, it doesn't matter which show you're listening to or which show you do listen to. You'll all go to the same page. You'll all sign up at the same place. And then I only have one thing to worry about as far as Patreon, and I can put everything there. And I think it will be great for everybody because I'll have more content on there for you, and it will help to bring the various communities that have formed around my various shows together so we can focus fire and all kind of band together and enjoy nerddom and geekdom together in a larger community, which I think will be awesome. And it will be really great for those of you that listen to more than one of my show, because you won't have to go 2 different or 3 different or 4 different places to get your bonus content and stuff like that. So I will keep you posted on that. I'm hoping to get that set up in the next week or two. I'm still getting things kind of dialed in the studio here, and I haven't even gotten set up for video yet. So I will let you know on the Game Masters Journey Google Plus community. I'll tweet it on Twitter, and I'll let you know on the show when that's up and where you can go. Hopefully it will be patreon.com/Starwalker is what I'm going to shoot for. Hopefully no one took that, but we'll see. But I will let you know probably next episode, hopefully episode 43, I will have details on the new Patreon. So thank you, Chris, for becoming a patron, and thank you to all my patrons. I really appreciate it. All right, and I also want to thank Nathaniel Starr for your email that you sent me. Nathaniel had a really great point about kitchen sink settings. So I talked about kitchen sink settings on episode 17, and I mentioned how I was not a fan of how settings like the Forgotten Realms and Golarion have different regions with very different flavors, whether those flavors are coming from different historic periods or different geographical areas in Earth's history, or different genres, for instance, a horror area or a steampunk area or an area that's based on Japanese feudalism with samurai and ninjas and stuff like that. So Nathaniel said that when these are done really well, that juxtapositions like these can really work and can help to avoid boredom in long-running campaigns, because you can have some changes and mix it up every now and then. And he's absolutely right. Some of the greatest stories come about by mashing together a few very different elements. So Nathaniel said that his problem with playing in a setting like the Forgotten Realms or Middle Earth is that it can be hard to make the setting yours. And as a player, it can feel like you really can't affect anything. And I completely agree, and that's one reason that I'm a little worried about D&D's new Rage of Demons storyline that's coming out. And I talked a little bit about that with Will Johnson, so you can go back to the past few episodes on running adventure paths if you want to hear that. You know, it's bad enough that there are so many Mary Sues that exist in the realms, which annoys a lot of people, myself included. Inserting one of those into your game group really isn't a great idea. So I'm very concerned with what Wizards is doing there. Hopefully the whole thing of Drizzt being in the party with you is something that's going on in the Neverwinter MMO and maybe in the Sword Coast Legends video game, and is not something that's going to be happening in the published module for the tabletop role-playing game, but we'll have to see. So I think you can, make one of these published settings work for you, even one that's really well known, even one that your players know. The key here, I think, is to really make the setting your own. Don't be afraid to kill off those Mary Sues. If you're running in Forgotten Realms, don't be afraid to kill off Drizzt Do'Urden. Don't be afraid to kill off Elminster. Get rid of them. If you're one of those people that you think that, the Realms is pretty cool, except for all these ridiculous characters, get rid of them. Kill them off in glorious ways or horrific ways, or just say they never existed in your version of the Realms or whatever world you're running. Don't be afraid to make any kind of major changes, and don't be afraid to answer questions that come up from the players with your own ideas and your own imagination instead of going to the campaign book and looking it up, or the campaign setting book. So that's what I do a lot with Forgotten Realms, or what I used to do when I used to run in the Realms in the 2nd edition and 3rd edition days, is, when a player asked me a question, I wouldn't go look it up in the book or go find the novel that's about that and read it. I just make up shit. And that's, from then on, that was canon in my world. Now, what I do for the Forgotten Realms is I mine the published setting for ideas on things that have happened in history, places in the world, maps, where things are, what's there, things like that. But I freely change anything I don't like. I add and subtract things. And I think the only real danger with this approach is in doing too little to change the world and make it your own. If you really make the setting your own and, change things left and right whenever you want to make it what you want it to be, then it will be very clear to your players that this isn't the canon Forgotten Realms or Middle Earth or whatever setting you're playing in. However, if, you're just making a few tiny changes here and there, then they may forget that this isn't canon because it seems so much like canon. So I would advise make all kinds of changes. I think this is also relevant, especially to Star Wars. In fact, I think it's even more relevant for Star Wars because for so many of us, that setting is very well known, even more than the others. I discussed running in an established setting like Star Wars with Joshua Brown during our interview in episodes 32 and 33, so definitely check those out. And I know I've heard from more than one GM who is either reluctant to run in Star Wars or finds it difficult to run in Star Wars just because the setting is so well defined. But again, don't be afraid to make it your own. In the end, I think the limitations of running a game in someone else's setting exist only in your mind and your players' minds. In the great words of Yoda, you must unlearn what you have learned. Make it your own. All right, so let's get on to our main topic today, which is being a good player, how to be a better player. So before I really get into this, just as kind of an aside, but a relevant aside, I wanted to talk about how not to find a GM on Roll20 or anything like it. I spend a lot of time on Roll20. I run games on there. And I also like to frequent the forums. They have a looking for group forum where people will post where they're looking for players or GMs or whatever. And I just like to see kind of what people are playing, what people are running, what people are wanting to play. So I go there, probably 2 or 3 times a week and check that out. And I've noticed a few things doing that. First of all, there are way, way more posts by players who are looking for a GM than GMs that are looking for players. And when a GM does post looking for players, it really doesn't matter what game they pick. They very quickly get a lot of responses. So first of all, if you're a player and you're wanting to play RPGs on Roll20 or something similar, and you can't get in a game, well, run a game. There are tons of players looking for a GM, and you can say, hey, I want to run D&D 5th edition or whatever you want to run. I've never GM'd before. I've never run this game before. You can tell people I'm a beginner. Maybe tell them you're looking for beginning players or whatever, and people will come out of the woodwork to play your game. And at least what they say on the forums that I can see publicly, they seem to be very willing to work with a new GM, even if they're more experienced. So, as promised, here are some tips on how not to find a GM on Roll20. So, if you want to make a post on Roll20 or someplace like it, looking for a GM and yet completely fail to find a GM, here's my advice on how to do that. So, a little sarcasm here, right? All right, so my first tip, create a group of players. Get together, find yourself a full group of players. Find, 3 other players, so you got a group of 4. Better yet, find like 5 or 6 other players. Get you a good 6 to 8 person group together. All of you make characters, okay? And then go look for a GM. You might think I'm crazy if you've never looked at those forums, but people do this all the time. Or even better, choose a module or a published adventure that you want to play, and then make your posts. I'm looking for a GM to run me and my 5 friends in this specific adventure. Although these people do find GMs, but anyway, here's my advice on how not to find a GM. So why, in case you're wondering why I say this, GMs have their own ideas for stories that they want to run, adventures they want to run. So, a GM doesn't really need you to tell them what adventure to run. And I mean, think about it. If you're looking for a GM and you say, hey, I want to play Star Wars and I'm looking for a GM, potentially any GM running Star Wars could grab you up into their group, right? But if you say, I want to play Star Wars and I want to specifically play the adventure Beyond the Rim, well, then the only GM that is going to be looking at you or talking to you is going to be a GM who's already decided they're running Beyond the Rim or wants to run Beyond the Rim or is willing to run Beyond the Rim and doesn't have enough players, which are going to be a lot fewer GMs. Not to mention it's just kind of obnoxious, I think. Also, I think making a character before you even have a GM and or a group is bad form. The GM may have his own house rules or character creation guidelines, which will make your character not valid. If dice rolling is involved in character creation in your game of choice, the GM may actually want to see you roll those dice and not just take a total stranger at his word that that's what he rolled. My biggest advice, though, is if you're a player and you are searching high and low for a GM, can't find a GM, man up and run a game. Believe me, I have heard all the excuses from people. I've seen all the excuses, things like I don't have time, I don't know the rules well enough, I don't think I'll be any good at it, whatever. Or, maybe the most common, if perhaps unspoken, reason, I just don't want to do it. Well, most of us who are GMs had those same issues, maybe had all of those issues when we started, and we did it. And you never know, you might turn out to be a great GM. You might find out that you actually like being a GM a lot more than you like being a player. That's what happened to me. I really wanted to play D&D and other games back in the day. I had a really hard time finding groups that weren't already full that would let me play. And so out of necessity, I started running my own games and very quickly realized that I much preferred running games to playing in them. And I still feel that way 20 plus years later. So you never know until you try it. So I talk a lot about being a GM on this show. Michael Christensen, I hope I said that right, made a really interesting post on Google Plus about how to be a good player. And he is wanting to put together basically a handout. I guess he's going to give this to his players. So more power to him. I hope he's successful with that. He had a few ideas, and he was kind of asking for ideas from people on, kind of tips on how to be a better player. And I thought that was a really cool topic. Great idea for an episode of this show. So here we are. So as I just said, I have a lot more experience GMing than I do playing, to the point that I wonder sometimes how good of a player I really am, since I've done it so little. However, with that said, because I have GM'd so much, I do have a lot of ideas for you on how you can be a better player. So maybe you're looking for a GM online or in your hometown or whatever. One thing that will really help in finding a GM and finding a group and staying in that group is being someone that people enjoy playing with, and being someone that your GM enjoys running for. And especially if you've never GM'd or haven't GM'd very much, it may not be clear to you how to do that. So I think this episode is really going to be for players who haven't really GM'd much or at all. I think for those of us that GM, everything I'm going to say is like, you already know that because you GM, and this is kind of like how not to annoy your GM, or how to make your GM feel like he's spending his time in a worthwhile way by running this game for you and the rest of your friends. So here are my tips on how to be a better player, again, kind of from my GM's perspective. And I have a couple broad categories with ideas underneath. So first off, I have respect and appreciate your GM, and show that respect and appreciation to your GM. Prepping and running an RPG takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. If you've never done it, it takes way more than you probably realize or think it does. Time, energy, creativity, all that. Frankly, it's a lot of work. And not just preparing the game, but actually running the game. One thing that the good players realize is that running a session can be a lot of work, and there are ways that you as a player can make that easier for your GM, or at the very least not make it harder than it has to be. And that's what a lot of this stuff is about. So I think most of us who GM do it because we love it, although some may do it because no one else in their group of friends will. However, anyone can burn out. No matter how much you love being a GM, you can burn out. I know last summer I was running a lot of games, running a lot of Numenera specifically, and then I went to Gen Con and I ran a bunch of demos there, and I was running demos online, and I started getting pretty burnt out, not only on Numenera the game specifically, but just on GMing in general. It's like, writers refer to going to the well, like this well of creativity and well of ideas, and sometimes the well runs dry. Sometimes it needs time to refill. You need to recharge your batteries, right? I got all kinds of metaphors here. So anyone can burn out. It can happen to anybody. It will happen if you GM enough, but there are things that your players can do to delay that or even prevent that. And there are things that your players can do that will make it more likely that you are going to burn out, and burn out fairly soon. So as GMs, we're constantly coming up with ideas, stories, characters, and in my experience, nothing can dry up those new ideas and kind of kill my enthusiasm for a game than feeling like I'm not appreciated by the players. So, if you're enjoying your game that you're playing, let your GM know. I mean, you don't have to blow a ton of sunshine up his ass, but say, hey, I really dig this session because of XYZ, and let her know why you're enjoying it, what things about it you like, whatever it is, because not only will that encourage her and make her feel like you appreciate all the time and effort she's putting into this, but it also communicates what you like so that she can do more of that. And, there's this kind of wisdom of, how you talk to people and how to criticize people in a way that they will be receptive. And, one of the best tricks is, if you're about to criticize someone for something they did that you didn't like or something that you think they can improve on, start out by telling them something that you did like, right? So, before you say something negative, say something positive. So if your GM did something that you really didn't like, find something that the GM did that you did like and open with that. And a lot of times your GM will be more receptive to the thing that you didn't like. And that's just a thing with people. It's not just GMs. Also, just show basic respect. There are many ways to just show basic respect, including things like show up to the game on time. I mean, shit happens, right? Stuff comes up. Sometimes you got to be late, whatever, unforeseen circumstances or whatever. I mean, that's fine. Shit happens. But do everything in your power to be there on time. That shows respect for your game master's time and everybody else at the table's time too. Try to avoid out of character or irrelevant conversation at inappropriate times, especially if the GM is trying to run an emotionally charged scene. Don't kill the scene with a joke or a comment about how this reminds you of some movie or something like that. Just don't do it. Respect the other players as well and the GM by respecting their turns. Wait your turn. So, when it's another player's turn, try to respect that person and not interrupt them when they're taking their turn, letting them make their own decisions. Don't be telling them what they should do. And also, when your turn comes, know what you're going to do. I see this so often. And I think I do it myself as a player. Maybe you're distracted and you're not paying attention, or maybe you are paying attention and you're just so involved with what everybody else is doing and what's happening that you're not even thinking about what you're going to do. And then the GM says it's your turn and you're like the deer in the headlights and you're like, oh crap, what should I do? Now, one trick that I've seen some GMs do that works really well, and I keep meaning to try to remember to do this myself when I run games, is what you can do is when you call on someone to take their turn, you can tell the next person that they're on deck. So, okay, John, it's your turn, and Brian, you're on deck. And then that reminds Brian that, oh, hey, I'm next after John, and so I can think about what I want to do if I haven't already. Now, things change, and I know I was playing, I think it was Princes of the Apocalypse recently, in my buddy Dwayne's game, and I was trying to plan what I was going to do ahead of time, but a lot of times by the time my turn came, the thing I was going to do no longer works because of something that happened, and now I got to start over. And it's really rough when you're playing a wizard because you have so many options. Fighter, it's a lot easier. It's like, what weapon will I use against which target? All right, there's a little more to it than that, but you know what I mean. Also, you can help out the GM whenever and however you can, and there are a lot of ways that you can do this as a player, and it's going to depend on your GM and how your GM does things. But if your GM asks you for help, then help. Or if you see a way that you can help, suggest to your GM that, hey, I could do this for you if you like. So you can do things like roll the dice for NPCs if there's a lot of NPCs, or track the initiative so the GM doesn't have to. That's a great thing for players to do, is one of the players take charge of initiative. Everybody rolls their initiative. That player keeps track of who's next. And then that player, I guess, is the one to tell people when they're on deck. Help manage other players. So if another player is being disruptive or being rude, or whatever, don't wait for the GM to deal with it. You deal with it. Say, hey buddy, let's stay in character or whatever, and help keep the game on track, right? If people are going off on tangents or talking about what they did last night, help keep the game on track at the very least by not participating in that yourself, but even better, bring the conversation back to the game. Also, I think another big one here is trust your GM. If you trust your GM, then act like it and show your GM that you trust her. If you don't trust your GM, find another group to game with. Life is too short. Don't waste time playing with people that you don't get along with or don't trust. There's plenty of people out there. You can find a group you can gel with. So part of this here is like, don't keep secrets from the GM. Don't try to pull one over on him. Okay? Don't go and make secret plans with the other players and then just spring the whole thing on the GM out of nowhere. Right? And, you see this happen in your groups or online. If you're watching games on YouTube, you'll see this happen. And when a player does this, I think it really shows a lack of trust in the GM, or maybe even just a lack of understanding of what the GM's role really is. Or the player's just being an asshole. Sometimes that's the case. The GM is not there to ruin your fun, right? Or to keep you from doing what you want your character to do. The GM is there to create an awesome experience and story. So if you let the GM in on whatever the thing is that you're planning, then she can be ready for it. She can think about it ahead of time, and she can come up with what the consequences of that are going to be, how the NPCs are going to react, things like that. And the game will be a lot cooler if you let her do that than if you just blindside her with it out of nowhere. Because then she's going to just have to do whatever pops up at the top of her head, and it's not going to be nearly as cool as if she could have had time to think about it, right? I also really hate the adversarial nature that this behavior brings to the game. This feeling of it's the players against the GM and vice versa. And, a lot of times it's kind of, fingers are pointed at the GM for creating that feeling in the game, but the players can do it too. And this is one way that the players can do that, is by trying to blindside the GM with things, keep secrets from the GM, or just intentionally fucking with the GM, right? Like intentionally turning left when the GM seems to want you to go right. Not because you particularly care, but just because the GM wants you to go right, so you're going to go left. That kind of thing. There's this reciprocal nature, right, between the GM and the players in a role-playing game. And yeah, the GM should be giving you free reign to do whatever you want to do with your character. But, sometimes you got to throw the GM a bone and follow the story where it takes you. So it's been a long time, I think, since someone's pulled this on me, the whole coming up with some scheme among the players and refusing to let me in on it until they're ready to do it, and then I have to cope with it. It's been a long time since I've had that happen. I think if that happened now, I know it would annoy me, and I think that my response would be, okay, that's the end of our session. I'm going to end right there and take the next week or 2 weeks, however long it is until we game next, to figure out how I'm going to respond to this. I'm not going to let you put me on the spot and force me to do this now. And hopefully this happens like half an hour into the session. And maybe that'll be a good lesson of, well, hey, if we spring this on Lex, he's just going to stop and, take his time to figure out what he's going to do. So we're better off either doing it at the end of the session so we don't lose game time, or maybe, let him in on the secret. I don't know. Okay, so that's all kind of ways that you can show respect and appreciation to your GM. And more as I get older and I have more and more experience with role-playing games, more and more I realize that this, in my experience, is what kills games. This is what keeps campaigns from finishing. This is what keeps player characters from getting to max level or whatever, is GM burnout. The GM loses interest, loses steam, doesn't want to do it anymore, or maybe the players do, or both. And at least from the GM side of the table, in my history, I found that a lot of times when I'm getting ready to run a game and I just don't want to do it. I'm just like, I would kind of rather be doing something else right now than getting ready to run this game. When I feel that way, a lot of times, if I trace it back, the reason is because I don't feel like I'm appreciated or my game is appreciated, or I don't feel like the players are enjoying themselves or they're not into it, and it's not fun, and why spend your time doing something that's not fun? This is a hobby, right? So that kind of brings me to my next kind of broad category, which is just get into it. It's a great way to be a great player, is get into it. So one way that you can really get into the game is make as developed of a character as you can. Now, don't hit your GM with a 10-page background, but have a real, three-dimensional fleshed out character. Have an idea of who this person is, who this person was, and who you want this person to become. Have an idea for an arc for your character, where you want your character to end up at the end of the campaign. Maybe goals that your character has, right? So if you're playing, a game like D&D or Star Wars or something like that, you start out with kind of a beginning character who doesn't have a lot of power, and you play through a long period of time and you end up very influential and powerful and all this stuff. So think about, where do you want your character to end up? What kind of person do you want your character to become? And those are great things to discuss with your GM before the first session, to kind of let the GM know what you're thinking, and you guys can bounce ideas back and forth, and your GM can start to make some plans, kind of factoring in these things that you want to happen in the long run. Another great way to get into it is interact with NPCs. So anytime something stalls or you're looking for something to do, find an NPC nearby and go talk to them. Whether it's just the bartender or someone on the street or whatever. Interact with the NPCs. Role play with them. Ask questions. Ask questions of NPCs. Ask questions of your GM. Explore the world. Explore the setting, the history, and challenge your GM to have answers and to have history and have things in your world to explore. Another great way to get into the game and to kind of show appreciation for your GM and help your GM stay excited for the campaign is to interact with the game, interact with the GM and the other players between sessions. Get together with the GM and or other players and talk about the game. Even have in-character conversations if the in-game situation allows for it. If you're playing an online game, use the forums for your campaign between sessions to have conversations in and out of character. Not only will that help you and the other players stay excited about the game and be into it and help you develop your interpersonal relationships among the PCs and develop your backstories and plan for the future and things like that, but it also shows the GM that you're interested in the game and that you're thinking about it other than once a week when you play or whatever. For me as a GM, there is a huge difference between a group that is active on the forums and discussing their characters and role playing between sessions or asking me questions by email or text or whatever, versus a group where I don't hear a peep from them in between game sessions. So guess which of those two groups is much more likely to keep going over the long haul? It's a pretty easy guess. Another great way that you can help your GM out is to do your part as a player to help ensure that everyone gets equal attention. For yourself, make sure that you're not hogging the limelight, that you're not interrupting other players, or you're not giving other players opportunities to do what they want to do or say what they want to say. If you know that there are players in your group who are maybe more shy or they just don't role play as much, try to draw them out in character. I had a player in a lot of my games years ago who was really great at this, because I a lot of times had new players that were either new to the game or new to role playing altogether. And if we had someone like that, he would sit by that person and he would interact with them every chance he got in character to kind of pull them into what was going on with the group overall and to just kind of bring them out of their shell. And that's a great thing for you to do as a player. Also, if you have newer players at the table, you can help them with any questions they have or issues with maybe their character sheet or whatever, so that the GM doesn't have to take time to do that. And You can kind of quietly do that while maybe the GM is answering another player's question or role-playing with another player or something like that, and that helps out a lot. Also, another great way that you can be an excellent player is to take notes. Do not rely on the GM to remember things for you. That really sends a message to your GM. When you never write anything down, you never remember anything, and you're always asking the GM what the name of such and such NPC was or what the thing was that the bad guy said last session, and you just don't remember anything that happened before, any details, that really sends a message of I don't give a shit to the GM, and it's not fun for the GM and makes it much more likely that GM is going to get burned out. So take notes, remember things. Write down things that are important because, unless you play every day, if you're playing like once a week or once every other week, you will forget. Even though you might think, oh, I'll remember this, you may not. Or what if something happens and you don't play for a month? So it's always great to take notes. And if all the players do that, it's really great because a lot of times, one player writes down something that nobody else does and it ends up really helping. Also, don't be a rules lawyer. Don't be that guy. It's great to know the rules. It's great to have players who know the rules. I love having players at my table who know the rules. And if your GM is open to it, it's fine to tell the GM what the book says about a particular rule if you happen to know. But at the end of the day, it's the GM's call. It's the GM's word that's final, not what's in the book. And once the GM's made her decision, don't argue. Just move on with the game. Often as a GM, when I make rulings, I'm much more concerned with the pacing of the scene and the game overall and keeping the action going and keeping things interesting than I am about getting a rule exactly right the way it is in the book. Also, as a GM, my primary concern when making rulings or making house rules is balance, which is something that a lot of times players don't think about. And in fact, sometimes some players will even push for things that they know is unbalanced because it favors their character. A good player doesn't do this. I think a good rule of thumb that I try to follow myself when I'm playing is before I ask the GM something like, hey, can I do this with this spell? Or hey, can we use this alternate rule or whatever? I ask myself, if I was a GM, would I allow this? And if I'm like, hell no, then I don't ask. Right? It's like, well, if I wouldn't let my players do it, why should I expect this GM to let me do it? Because I have good reasons that I won't let my players do it, right? I don't like not let players do things just because I want to like kill their fun. I do it because I'm trying to keep things balanced and keep things interesting for everybody and keep everybody on an equal playing field. And so, give your GM the benefit of the doubt that's her motivation too. And, don't try to squeak stuff by because it's just going to ruin things for everybody. And she's going to end up either keeping that rule because she made it and now you're all stuck with it and you're all miserable because this rule is screwing everything up. Or later she's going to have to change it again, right? Which just disrupts things. So ask yourself, if you were GM, would you allow this? Another great way that you can be an awesome player is if your GM invites player ideas for things like places, NPCs, names, what's that tapestry on the wall, stuff like that, then make the most of it. If you know your GM does that, maybe come up with ideas, just random ideas of, characters or places or whatever. So if your GM's ever like, I don't know, what is inside this store? You can be like, hey, I got an idea. It's a lot of fun. And if you're a newer player or you've never GM'd before, it's also a great way to kind of stretch those muscles before you take a plunge as GM of just coming up with ideas for things. And it's a great way for you to have ownership of the world and make your mark on it as a player if you have a GM that lets you do that. And if your GM doesn't do that, maybe, suggest it, because most GMs, if not all GMs, are overworked. We're juggling a lot of pins. Is that how they say it? We're doing a lot of different things when we're running a game. And if you as a player have an idea of a way to lighten that load for the GM, ask them. probably better to ask in between sessions, not, or, at the beginning or the end of a session, not in the middle of something, but maybe say, hey, it'd be cool if you want, if once in a while, you just had us come up with the name of an NPC, or had us describe an NPC, or had us say what a particular building is. Like, that would be fun, and it'd take the pressure off you. Or hey, I'd be willing to track initiative if you like. This is kind of a very popular thing now. You're seeing it more and more in games where, players are coming up with story elements, and some games have it just built in mechanically. Some games you're just encouraged to do it as a GM. And I think it's a really cool thing. And I think that it can be a very powerful tool as a GM to invoke your player's ability to create things. And, don't just do it when nothing comes to mind and you're stuck, but, do it as often as you can, because it makes them more involved in the story and the setting, and allows you as a GM to occasionally be surprised by things too, which is fun. So there are some thoughts on how to be a great player, how to be a better player. Again, all this really boils down to showing respect and appreciation to your GM, and, really getting into the experience as much as you can. The more fun you're having, the more fun the other players will have, and the more fun the GM will have. And it all kinds of feeds on itself. The more positive energy you can bring to the session, the better it's going to be for everyone, especially if everybody's making that effort. And if you are making the effort, it's much more likely that other people will as well. And so finally, just one last time, I will appeal to you, please, if you're a fan of role-playing games, you love playing role-playing games, and you've never taken the plunge, you've never tried running a game, give it a shot. Pick the game that you're the most comfortable with, that you enjoy the most, or you like the most. Just come up with a short, one session scenario, or run something published, and just give it a whirl. It's a lot of fun, and you may love it. And if you are playing a game system that has beginner games, then that can be a great way to do it. Star Wars beginner games are phenomenal. I've run the Edge of the Empire one. I just got the Force and Destiny one. I'm going to be running it this week, and they're awesome. They teach you how to play the game. They teach you how to run the game. They do a great job. The starter box for D&D is pretty good too. Good thing to start out on. I don't think it's quite as good as the Star Wars beginner games as far as teaching you how to be a GM and how to run the game, but it's definitely an easier place to start than, grabbing the DMG and the player's handbook and jumping in the deep end. So definitely check into something like that if your game of choice has a product like that. And also another great place to get help and tips is to go to any forums or communities that exist for your particular game and asking the GMs there for advice. And if you're running a published adventure, a lot of times you can find a thread specifically about running that adventure where GMs compare notes and ideas and things like that. And I know, as Will talked about in a previous episode, the Paizo message boards are really great for that. If you're running any Paizo adventures or adventure paths, they will have a forum for each of those products, and you can get all kinds of great ideas from other GMs there. Well, that is going to wrap up episode 42 of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to reach me, please email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can find me on Google+, just look for Lex Starwalker, and follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Please visit my website, starwalkerstudios.com. You can find all my podcasts there. You can find the show notes for this episode there at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey /42. And in the show notes, you can find the highlights of what I talked about today. You can find lots of helpful links. At the top of the show notes, you'll find our Patreon button that will take you directly to the Patreon page. When I launch the new Patreon, I will change that button. So anytime in the future or in the past, if you're a time traveler and you're listening to this, you can just go to Game Master's Journey website at starwalkerstudios.com, go into the show notes of the most recent episode, and click that Patreon button, and it's going to take you to the right place. There's also a donate button there if you'd like to make a one-time donation. Also, the iTunes and Stitcher buttons are there at the top of the show notes and will take you directly to the show on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can subscribe and or listen there and or leave a review would be great. And at the bottom of the show notes, you'll find a link to our Google Plus community. You'll find links to email me, to my Twitter, all that good stuff, as well as a link to our free 30-day trial of Audible books that you can get courtesy of Game Master's Journey. So again, you can find all that stuff and more at starwalkerstudios.com. So I hope you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week, and I hope that you will be able to take some tidbits, some gold nuggets of thoughts and wisdom, even maybe, from this episode and apply it to your playing so that you can be an even better player than you already are, and you can just fill your GM sails with all kinds of creative wind and just keep your campaign going strong. And I really hope that you'll try running a game if you've never done so. And if you do, let me know how it goes. You can email me, and I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on being a better player. I'm sure I have not covered everything. I probably just hit the tip of the iceberg here. So if you have any advice or ideas on how to be a better player, how to encourage your GM, things like that, let me know. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com, and I will share it with the other listeners. I will be back next week with another episode of the show. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.